Hello, PAC members. Good morning. I'm so proud to be part of this presentation, and I want to thank Moira Day for her support to make this happen, and to Francis, of course, for stepping up and preparing the presentation. So I've known about these very rare photographs at the Getty Research Institute for some time, but I really never knew the extent of the stories they tell. And the narrative you'll hear today spans centuries, for which most of us is really quite overwhelming to understand. So thank goodness for scholars who can break down the time periods and guide us to understand the people and the cultures, the wars and the political movements that impacted this area over a very, very long period of time. So ironically, that history is still being written today, which makes it all the more prevalent and fascinating to understand. In addition to the very early photos of Vignes, which you're going to see, Fran is also going to share contemporary observations of the site by Ursula Schultz-Dornburg, a contemporary German photographer. And I think you will find these images as equally profound. So we've heard the expression, some pictures speak volumes. And if anyone knows, or indeed has written those volumes, it's Frances. So we're so lucky to have her today to tour us through this incredible archive. So sit back and enjoy. Frances?
Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Bailey. I only wish this tour could be in person. And post-pandemic, I invite you all up to the Getty Research Institute, where I'd love to show you the actual works I'm going to talk about. Now, I'm going to speak about two different groups of photographs, a 19th century group and a 21st century group. But what I want to do is make it clear that I'm framing this around a broader talk, which is to explain photographs at the Research Institute, why we collect them, and how scholars use them. Unlike in contrast to a museum that looks at photographs, rightly so, from the history of photography, when we acquire material, we look at it for its importance in the history of photography, and more broadly for how photographs function as visual documents, as primary resources for a whole gamut of disciplines. All right, so I'm going to go ahead a little fast to make up for time. So let me explain that in 2015, we were offered an incredible rare set of photographs, which you see on the screen. We were offered about 50 photographs by the 19th century photographer Louis Vignes. And these had really not been on the market. A few Vignes photographs, like the ones you see over the last few years, had popped up at the market. But this group of 50 came directly from an aristocratic family in France that had held them since 1864 when they were taken. And Louis Vignes was part of a scientific mission to the Dead Sea that was spearheaded and personally funded by the Duc de Luynes. And what I'm showing you are two views of the city of Beirut. This is the port, which was in the news, sadly, in the last year because of that incredible explosion that happened close to the port. The majority of the views, however, are of the desert city of Palmyra. The Duke, after he explored the Dead Sea, he sent Vignes up to Syria to photograph this site, which had never been photographed before. So these views are the first photographs ever taken at this legendary historic site. What you're seeing is a monument known as the Temple of Bell, and it's really difficult in Vignes' photographs to understand, to comprehend the size of this building. This is one view of it. I'm showing you another. You can see all the rubble that is at the perimeter of the building. It was, in the 1st century AD, the largest structure in the ancient world. To understand the size, consider 4 football fields put together, contiguous. That was the size of this temple. Now, this is an interior view of the temple. We looked at two previously exterior views. And what you're seeing, it's confusing in the foreground, I'm using my arrow to point it out, is you're seeing actually adobe structures that had been built throughout the succeeding centuries because the city shrunk. And when it did, the village moved itself into the temple, used it as a fortification. And then these are all the tops of their houses within the temple. And they used the temple walls as city walls. Back here in the distance, what you see are a later Ottoman castle. And then this is another view of the Temple of Bell, the same adobe houses from a different vantage point. And this is a construction known as the Saracen Gate, which was built sometime in the medieval period as part of the fortification of the city. The Temple of Bell is on the east side of Palmyra. And what I'm showing you now are Vignes' views of this colonnade, which stretched from approximately the Temple of Bell westward to the other end of the city. The city was about 3 kilometers in length. The colonnade itself is 1 kilometer in length. And it's a remarkable structure. Here where more columns were extant, you can see these little corbels that go the whole length of the colonnade. These actually held life-size bronze statues. Some of you might have seen the show a few years ago at the Getty Villa of ancient bronze work, and you can imagine that each of these held a figure. What's also quite remarkable about this colonnade is this is one side, the right side, this is the left side where fewer columns stand, is that a remarkable, it had a roof. So imagine in the desert climate, this roof provided shade and protection against the elements. And imagine what it would be like to move along the colonnade, the whole extent of it. Another view of the colonnade that Vignes was capturing, remember no one, hardly anyone in the Western world had been there, just a few visitors in the 18th century. Again, the colonnade looking westward towards this castle. And then what we see is Vignes' attempt to make a panorama. He didn't have a panorama lens, but he used his camera to create 2-part panoramas, as he did here, to show the extent of the colonnade. Back over here on the left in the distance is the Temple of Bell. And then he captured also a view of the best preserved ancient monument at the site, which is this beautiful little Roman style temple of Balshamin. His 3-part panorama where he backs up and he's trying to give a sense of the overall city. And then on the western side of the city is an even more sought after site in terms of knowledge about it. This is called the Valley of the Tombs. What you're looking at here in this structure is what's called a tower tomb. And these kinds of tower tombs are unique to Palmyra. They don't exist at any other ancient site. And what's hard again to grasp is the size of them. They're really, really big. Interestingly, Vignes did not include people in his photographs, so it's hard to get a sense of scale. This is the one that we just looked at. Then there are others in less good shape. But here, I'm taking you to an entirely different sense of Palmyra. And it's another reason I wanted to point out why we do what we do at the Research Institute. So in 2015, when we were considering these photographs by Vignes, and it was a very important and expensive acquisition for us, we needed the backing of our director and our president. One of the arguments in acquiring them was because we already held a suite of about 100 etchings that had been done at Palmyra by Casas, Louis-Francois Casas. And this is a view of Casas, who's just arrived in Palmyra in 1785. He's offering gifts to the local Bedouin chieftains, and they're inside the Temple of Bel. Now, as I said, I really wish I was showing you this in person, because the etchings, I wanted you to understand the materiality of the pieces, are actually bound in a volume. You can see a little bit of deterioration on the margin. And this is Casas' bird's eye view of the city of Palmyra. Here is the Temple of Bel on the east side. Here's the colonnade that stretches westward. And then over here is a view of the Valley of the Tombs. Casas was a remarkable draftsman, and he's giving us a firsthand view similar to Vignes of a side of the Temple of Bel from the exterior. He includes people. So now we get a sense of the true monumentality of this building. Here are a few here. Here are a few over here in the village. Note the massive amount of rubble that existed in the 18th century, which Vignes was also capturing later in the 19th century. A quick view I want to show you at his rendering of the colonnade as it stood in the 18th century, and then his ground plan below. A more distant view of the city with bits of the colonnade here and here, the Temple of Bel in the background, and he's showing an actual caravan coming through. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and why Palmyra was as important and wealthy as it was to be able to build these kinds of structures. Now we get a better sense of the Valley of the Tombs in the 18th century. The structures are a bit more they have a better state of preservation than in the 19th century. And what's remarkable about the Casas etchings is that he not only gave us renderings of what the site looked like in the 18th century, but he did reconstructions. And this is one of his reconstructions for a tower tomb. So these are all bust portraits of the people who are buried here. These are larger full body statues of the people who are buried here. This is a cross section of what the tombs look like inside. And this is was the best preserved tomb in the 18th, 19th century. We saw a Vignes photograph of the tomb of Alabel. Look at the scale of it just on the first floor. And it's a remarkable interior decoration. It might look familiar because, in fact, since the 18th century and its first drawings that came to the west of the city of Palmyra, its decoration and its other tomb sculptures proliferated the Western aesthetic. And we see them in our bank buildings and in other kinds of public and private buildings. This is Casas' rendering of tomb robbers. And indeed, there were tomb robbers. And then here I take you to a 21st century view of what Palmyra looks like, or look like, I should say. Here is the Temple of Bel, the colonnade stretching across the city, and we're on the ridge before the Valley of the Tombs. And then there was Isis. So this is an image I pulled off of Google. It was done in 2015. ISIS invaded Palmyra twice, just as we were negotiating the price of the Vignes photographs. They took over Palmyra and they blew up parts of it and tragically killed many of the inhabitants. They purposefully posted images like this as part of their propaganda. All right, so when we acquired these photographs, we felt obliged to make them available to the world at large, given the destruction that was happening at Palmyra. We created this online exhibition, The Legacy of Ancient Palmyra. And I'm going to let this is the opening of it. I'm going to let it run through. We purposefully wanted to open with kind of a cinematic view of the city, showing what kind of imagery had been taken in the early modern period of the site. And we felt this was appropriate since we're an LA institution, where obviously the film world is so predominant. Now, we called it The Legacy of Ancient Palmyra because we were focusing on what the discovery of Palmyra meant to the West. And this is our landing page for the exhibition. I wanted to give you a sense of how we worked with both Cassat's etchings and Vignes' photographs, providing also information for an understanding of the site. So here's Palmyra in Syria, and it was perfectly located for long distance trading with silks and spices coming from the Han Dynasty in China, going all the way to the west to Roman Britain, or also sea trade coming up from the Persian Gulf and then across land with a caravan, like the kind of caravans that Cassat showed. I want to just quickly, since many of you are photo collectors, and I apologize for the scrolling, but I want to go down and show you an image of the photographer. So I'm scrolling through the exhibition. And we note that Cassat was about 80 years earlier at the site than Louis Vignes. Here's a self-portrait that I was able to find miraculously on the market soon after we acquired his photographs. And it shows a young self-portrait of Vignes in his 20s. I should say that the Duc de Luynes hired him for his scientific exploration of the Dead Sea because Vignes had two major qualities. He knew the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean, but he was also a skilled photographer. So he was working on that mission just when he was about 33 years old. Now, if we go back to the online exhibition, what we did is we also took Cassat's bird's eye view of the city, and we made all the sites interactive for which we held photographs and etchings. So for example, if I press on the Temple of Bell, you could scroll through easily all of the photographs and the etchings together. I'm pointing this out because this is why we collect photographs. We consider them research documents, and we look at how our photographs layer with other kinds of our special collections material. So let me now go back to our landing page and show you that in the exhibition, we also wanted to give an overview of Palmyra in the ancient world and why it was so important. We opened the ancient site or the ancient section with a detail of one of these funerary heads that I just showed you. And some of you might recall this. This is a funerary head that's held at the Getty Villa. And in Tim Potts's exhibition in, I guess it would be 2019, where he did a selection of recent acquisitions, you might recall that a recent acquisition on one of the funerary heads was featured. We wanted to show how in the ancient period, each of these sculptures was highly decorated, colored. And then I just want to briefly show how, again, we give an overview of a history of the site and its importance. So here you see the trading routes, which I mentioned in the previous slide. And you see why Palmyra is so ideally situated to take in the wealth that it took in and how it did this this is a difficult photograph to read. It's two modern photographs of the trading tariff stele that was mounted outside the city. And what these inscriptions are saying is it's giving you the cost to bring in goods in and out of the city. So in other words, they chiseled here the exact price of what it was to bring in a cartload of wine or a slave. And so imagine the profits that they were making given their incredible location in the trading routes. And then here in the rediscovery section, I want to mention how important the discovery in the 18th century of Palmyra was to Europe and the Western world. It's these kinds of prints showing the beautiful decoration, ancient decoration at Palmyra that so influenced the neoclassical period. So here we have a comparison of one of the 18th century prints showing a ceiling at the Temple of Bell with an actual neoclassical ceiling, and how this influenced our whole view in a way of changing our aesthetic. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that what happened is I always had this vision in 2017 to mount this exhibition in Arabic. There are 400 million Arabic speakers in the world. It's an online exhibition, and I felt it important to share our resources with this community. However, as it took us 18 months to build the legacy of ancient Palmyra, and adding on the extra difficulty of putting it up in Arabic, we just didn't have the time to do. So it wasn't until this year, February of this year, that we mounted this new exhibition called Return to Palmyra, which is also completely in Arabic. If you go on the site, you can press this button and go to the Arab portion of the website. Here, this is the exhibition I just showed you, the legacy of ancient Palmyra, but I'm going to briefly talk about the new content. This is the historic essay that we added, and this is a really important and poignant interview that we added in Return to Palmyra. So let me go to this website now and say that what also prompted us in building Return to Palmyra is DEAI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, both academically in what's happening in the academic disciplines, and also in our own community, particularly at the Getty, where DEAI is very much a priority and a mission for us. So by returning us to Palmyra with that title, what I was trying to do was bring Palmyra to back and give it a voice in its local community. We did this through the historic essay, with an essay that continues its history beyond the ancient period, talks about the local events and the Parthian Empire, and how Palmyra is a unique site that was between two worlds, the Roman and the Parthian world, and held its own in terms of staying independent and stable between these two powers. I'm dropping down to the end of the historic essay because I wanted to point out these two remarkable photographs that we included, early 20th century. This one's taken by the amazing scholar Gertrude Bell, and she captured the local community, particularly the women, in their homes. Think back on those images of the Temple of Bell that I'm showing you. They're standing outside here in their streets, outside their homes, at the inside the Temple of Bell, or yet again, another image of the local women. And what they're doing here is they're actually working on their adobe structures, because an adobe structure has to be renewed about annually to make sure that the fabric stands up. And so while we included a historic essay, we also have a very poignant interview. We had the honor of working with Walid Khaled al-Assad, with whom we did the interview. Walid is the former director of antiquities and monuments at Palmyra, and you might know the name Khaled al-Assad because it is his father, Khaled al-Assad, whose name was so much in the news during the ISIS occupation of Palmyra. In this interview, Walid talks about what it's like. Here he is as a child running through the gardens at Palmyra, what it was like growing up and being mentored in Palmyra by his famous father, and then how he took over the role that when his father retired there. I'm going to scroll down. I apologize for this, but I wanted to show you an image that he allowed us to use. It's a Polaroid from the mid-70s. And here is Walid here as a child with his dad's hand on his shoulder. This is Khaled. And it was a shot that was taken of the Japanese Syrian team that was excavating at the time at one of the earlier sites at Palmyra. And then let me move down. We had the great honor in this interview of including Ursula Schultz-Dornburg's photographs. Ursula's a contemporary German photographer. She has visited Palmyra twice in 2005 and 2010. And I find her work just awe-inspiring in terms of how she historically understands a site. So let me close out of this and go and talk a little bit about, oh, I forgot to point out, this is the landing page for the Arabic mirror image website. But what I want to do is end with just a few words on Ursula. So on the right, obviously, is the image I just showed you of the Valley of the Tombs by Ursula and one by Vignes. Let me say that I think Ursula's work is some of the most important conceptual work being done today, because she studies like a scholar a site before she visits it. As I said, she visited Palmyra twice in 2005, 2010. She is well read on the ancient and post-ancient history of the site. And if you look at her work, although it looks on the surface to be like Vignes, and let me say that she knows Vignes' work firsthand. When I visited her, I was taken aback to note that she actually owns a few of Vignes' prints of Palmyra. So it's not just from a textbook that she knows a site, but she really immerses herself in it, both visually and in terms of scholarly work on it. Again, a comparison between Ursula and Vignes. And to me, what's really significant about her work is how she focuses in on the details of a site. Here we see the actual building blocks of one of the walls at the Temple of Bell, the structures as they stand, and or more dramatically here, this is part of her series on Palmyra, or this wall where it's literally the building blocks that she is framing. She's framing them, I think, because she's trying to get at the local community. To her, it's the ancient people and the humanity at a site that is most important. And although she rarely has any people pictured in her series, that's what she's always talking about, is about the world at large and the human spirit that has made us what we are, or for example, here made the site of Palmyra what it is. She's focusing in on the fact she's chosen a detail where we see the put log holes. These are the holes that have been put in both at the quarry to be able to stick wooden supports to bring them out of the quarry and transport them to the site, or then to use in terms of providing the temporary scaffolding and wood as the structure's going up. She's getting at the details of who the local community are and what how they have fashioned and made it, and how the true value of archaeological sites rests in the hands of the local community. Let me close by saying that recently I was listening to an interview with James Baldwin, and he said something that I thought encapsulates the spirit of Ursula, which is, he said, quote, "The world is held together by the love and passion of a very few people." And to me, that's the work of this amazing photographer. So I'm going to stop there, and Bailey, maybe I'll let you take over the screen.
Hi, yeah, so go ahead and you can stop sharing screen, and then it'll just go ahead and go into speaker view.
Great.
Fran, that was just marvelous. Thank you so much.
Sorry
Yeah,
about the rough beginning.
No, it was terrific. It was terrific, Fran. And that site that you put together is extraordinary. I mean, it's this sort of the modern version of creating giant archives that will be there forever. I just love it. It was beautiful. So can users just go to getty.edu and or the Getty Research Institute? Where should they go to find that website?
Okay, I'm hoping Bailey could put our Return to Palmyra link in the chat.
Great.
And it will be up. It's up obviously currently, but it will be up for about another 2 years. It has a 3-year life.
Yeah. Yeah, and the exhibition is the original exhibition, and then there's the new interview and more of the Ursula work.
Well, what I did for this talk is I took you back to the original legacy site, which is now embedded in the Return to Palmyra site. Okay. So you won't find that independently, but you'll find it in the Return to Palmyra site.
Right.
I have a question. I was really fascinated by the Casa etchings also. And do they have any knowledge of how he creates bird's eye views and cross sections? That's unbelievable.
Exactly. I myself, we have in the 18th century, architects were able to do it, and it must be through instruments. But we have other examples of this, not by Casa, but other sites in the world from 18th century travelers that are amazing. And that's why I chose that image, because I think it shows what we don't understand that previous professionals could do. Particularly young people assume that everything was created in terms of knowledge in the last 10 years, and there's so much we have to learn, which I think is what Ursula is trying to say in her photographs too.
Yes.
Fran, we have a question coming in from Bob Markovich, and he says he has a couple of questions, but the first one is how much of Palmyra is still there after ISIS, after that giant explosion that you were showing us?
They targeted, sadly, they targeted the Temple of Bell, and it doesn't, everything I've showed you, the Temple of Bell looks different now. They targeted the major part of the colonnade and that little beautiful gem of a temple, Balshameen, and even the tower tombs. And what I didn't say is that in 2015, when they entered Walid al-Assad, the father, they had a little bit of warning that ISIS was en route, and Walid al-Assad courageously took as many of the portable objects from there's a museum in Palmyra, from the museum, and hid them. And so when ISIS came in, they captured him, they imprisoned him, they tortured him, and then they publicly beheaded him. And the story goes on. And then Walid, I've had the most amazing experience through Zoom working with his son, Walid. To prepare for the interview, Walid explained to us that, this has been very traumatic for him and the community, and it's not over. ISIS is still, they've left. The Syrian government now controls with Russia that part of the country, but it's still very, very tenuous. And most importantly, when you go to our website, you'll see that in 2010, for example, if my memory serves me right, I skipped over it, but the city itself, it's called Tadmor in Arabic, the city of Palmyra had 90,000 inhabitants or residents. And today it has 1,500.
Wow, wow. I have a question coming in here from, this is from Susan Ahrens. And she says, this is in relation to the Ursula's photographs. She said, did Ursula also return to photograph using the Getty's images by Vignes as a reference?
Well, okay. They're not our photograph. I mean, Ursula knew about Vignes' photographs when they came on the market. We bought this group of about 47 or 48. For some of the other images that we hold, there were second and third prints that were available on the market that were coming out at about the same time. And so Ursula, not knowing that we were buying them, and I wasn't in communication with her about it, also bought a few of Vignes' photographs. And she did it because that's the kind of artist she is. She wants to know a site deeply in all ways. So it wasn't our photographs, it was her photographs she was referencing.
Got it. And how big are her photographs? This is a question somebody put in. What the print size?
Oh gosh. Okay, so I forgot to mention when I was on the landing page for Return to Palmyra, that beautiful colored pixelated view of the Valley of the Tombs is an Ursula Schultz-Dornburg photographs, which she did with a small Japanese camera. Its name is escaping me on purpose. I think she's disarming in terms of how something can look so absolutely beautiful and suck you in, but there's a reason why she does what she does. So that image, which we do own, I had it up for any of you who have saw my exhibition on monumentality. I had it up next to some Vignes photographs, and I guess it's big, at least 11 by 14, or maybe 16 by 20. I'm really not sure. But if you go onto our website, it will give the dimensions.
Margie, did you have a question there?
No, I was
okay.
I was also fascinated by just the rubble, the whole thing about the rubble just appearing and reappearing and recycling and reappearing. I think that's a thread that, I don't know, just it really tells the whole story just by existing.
Right. Well, it all for all historic sites, no matter what the period, rubble is a part of the story. And between over the centuries, after the ancient period, its high point, Palmyra's high point was the 3rd century AD. But since then, there were 2 major earthquakes and wars. So a lot of the rubble came from probably the earthquakes. And then in the 20th century, as archaeologists were working on the site, they were using the quote unquote rubble to reconstruct the ancient buildings. And so it was going back up in place, obviously. And what is remarkable is while, and I hope you will all come and see the etchings next to the photographs, the Cassatt etchings, a great number of these 100 are reconstructions of how he thought the site looked. And both archaeologists and architectural historians have confirmed that he actually really understood what the ancient city looked like. So that one view that I showed you of a tower tomb probably looked the way it did. And a tower tomb was, as I said, unique to Palmyra in terms of its design, but they were massive. They could hold 400 bodies. Now, I know a lot of you in the audience go to museums, and I know a lot of you have seen these. So if you walk in the Getty Villa, you walk in the Met, you walk in the Yale Art Gallery, you're in Paris at the Louvre. Almost every major Western museum has a few of these funerary busts, because starting in the 18th century, when visitors, travelers were getting to Palmyra, they started acquiring the funerary busts. And actually the biggest collection of them resides in Copenhagen, because the founder of Carlsberg Brewery acquired dozens of them. And if you go to the exhibition website on Return to Palmyra, and you go to the legacy site, we have something called additional resources. And you can look at videos there. And there's a great talk given by Rabina Raja, who's the curator of the Palmyra Portrait Bust Project. And her life's work is creating a visual archive of these hundreds and hundreds of busts that exist. And while we can look down upon the fact that they were stolen, literally stolen from Palmyra, I guess given its more recent history with ISIS, it has preserved them. So there are pros and cons of this argument.
Yeah.
I have a question, Fran, about this is back to the Ursula photographs. I'm crazy about them. They're beautiful, and I was trying to decide whether she would consider herself an architectural photographer or a landscape photographer, because I know that, I mean, just looking at the main one that we used in the announcement, and the first one you showed of the temple, and then the temple, the tower, and then the temple further on, reminded me of like Mark Rudell, those people who take desert photographs, but hers have a definite architectural bent to them. So do you know how she considers herself as an architect or as a photographer?
I'm pretty sure Ursula would not consider herself either an architecture or a landscape photographer. She's strictly a conceptual photographer.
Conceptual photographer.
Strictly, yes. And on the surface, her work, as I said, looks very matter of fact and abstract. But if you know the history of a site, you understand that what she is doing is, in a way, she's capturing time, and the expanse of time, and the expanse of all of humanity that has, for me with Palmyra, that has kept this as a living site. I did an event a few weeks ago on Palmyra and other historic sites in the Middle East, and their importance in staying alive through the local community. And Ursula was absolutely thrilled that we were hosting that kind of an event, because for her, it's connecting with this local community that is the most important, whether she's picturing it in like this view behind me, or she's actually interacting with a local community, which she does on a personal level.
She's sort of the modern day Gertrude Bell, right?
Yes, on a humanitarian effort. Yep.
I find it really curious how we think about attention to detail. We look at the etchings and you can study every single detail and learn and, you know, see what those details teach us. And then the same thing with Vignes's photographs, right? The details he chose. And then fast forward to the 21st century and see the narrative created by a contemporary artist, Ursula, and the details she chooses. So that through line is I just love that whole concept that the details she chooses are just as important as the ones that Cassat would have chosen at his time.
Exactly. And that's history. I mean, history is not the same. History is defined by who's writing history and the time within which history is being written. So each of us are creating and have a special view on history. And exactly, I mean, you know, Vignes could not have understood the concept of a conceptual photograph. To him, the mission was the Duke sent him out to document it, and that's what he's doing. Ursula is now talking about, with Palmyra, where we are today in this 21st century. In fact, let me say that she told me her original goal to go to Palmyra was to photograph the infamous prison. For Syrians and other people in the Middle East, when you say the word Palmyra, it doesn't conjure up immediately this famous historic trading center. What it conjures up today is the atrocities that happened at the prison in Palmyra. And the only good thing that, but Ursula then told me she tried to get close to the prison to photograph it, and the authorities wouldn't let her. And the only possible positive thing that ISIS did in its occupation of the site is that they knocked down the prison. They destroyed the prison.
There's a question from Bob asking, are you aware of anybody photographing the site since the recent destruction?
Well, yes. Okay, so there's, yes, of course, scholars, and it's on our bibliography. We even have a bibliography on the return to Palmyra. There's a Viennese scholar, and his name is escaping me. Colonnade is his last name. I forget his first name. Colonnade. And he's retired now, but not really. I mean, he goes on, and he has dedicated his whole life to Palmyra. And I'm sure that he is somehow photographing it. But during his career, he also worked with an aeronautical space company in Germany or Switzerland. And they photographed the site with satellites before the destruction by ISIS. And there are also various attempts with other scholars to reconstruct the site virtually. And now also, the Syrian government has partnered with the Russian government to bring in a crew of Russian craftsmen to reconstruct the site as it was known in the 20th century.
Wow, that's amazing. Hey, Fran, I have a historical question. It's not a photography question, but it's about, so we're talking when this city was at its heyday, that was 700 and
No. So you might know the name Zenobia.
Yes.
Zenobia was the famous or infamous queen of Palmyra.
Right.
And she rebelled against the Roman Empire. If my memory serves me right, it's something like 278 AD.
278, okay.
And she, for a while, stood her own ground with her army, even captured a part of Egypt. But then the Roman emperor came in and we don't really know what happened, but legend has it that he captured her and took her back to Rome in golden chains. So if you go on our, if you go on the exhibition website, you'll see in the I forget, the rediscovery, you'll see what we know about Zenobia and the downfall of the city. And that doesn't mean that Palmyra didn't continue. It continued as a Roman, once the Roman Empire took it back over, it continued sort of as a secondary Roman site on the Eastern Roman Empire. And then all through the Islamic period, up to the modern time, it still continued as a trading center in a reduced fashion though.
Sorry about my lack of knowledge about that. I thought I wasn't thinking the right dates, but I had another question that's sort of related to that. You know, those wonderful photographs you showed of the tablets that had the price of wine and the price of a slave, a price of whatever. Were those from the Zenobia period or were they from the Roman period?
Yeah, right. So Zenobia was preceded by an emperor her husband, whose name escapes me. And they, the husband, the previous emperor, was given an official really high title by the Roman Empire. So they functioned, that was its high point, as an auxiliary of the Roman Empire. And the trading tablets I date from a little bit earlier than that period. But imagine the wealth coming into that city. I mean, it was what built those structures and why they're so utterly grand.
Right. Yeah. And as you showed on that map, it was exactly at the right point in the middle of everything on the way to and from wherever you'd want to get things from.
Right.
Yeah. So Fran, we're circling in on the last couple minutes of our talk, sadly, because I could listen to you all day long. And I was wondering, you know, we don't have any more questions coming in. No. And Margie, did you have any final comments?
I find it fascinating. I feel really fortunate because I know I've been through the website when the online exhibition was released. I went to it immediately and I couldn't do it in one sitting, Fran. It took me like about an hour in the morning and an hour later that afternoon. And then the next day I circled back and read more. It's a lot of reading, but it's very in depth, and the photographs, you know, that supplement the narrative really enhance it so much. So to be able to have your viewpoint about photography today adds really another layer to that. So I think anybody that might be interested in reviewing that online exhibition, now that you know some of the more in-depth information about the photography, I think your experience will be enhanced.
Right.
So,
And again, we put the website in the chat so you can find it there. And of course,
now I want to go read, like Michael asked the questions about the time periods and Zenobia, and now I kind of am inspired to even go learn more. So Thank you for that too. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Fran.
Thanks for having me. And I'm happy to do this in our reading room and show you the actual materials, which are really quite beautiful.
That's so kind. Thank you so much, Fran.
Anything else you wanted to add, Fran?
No, if there's any teachers in the audience, we had built this exhibition as a one that could be used from the high school up through the college level. And in about a month, we're going to be coming out with a study guide linked to the exhibition that will be both in English and Arabic. And if you want a link to the website for the study guide, please just send me an email at my first initial and my last name, FTERPAK @getty.edu, and I'll be happy to send you that link.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And there are tons of thank yous in the chat for you, Fran. And everybody loved it. It's just terrific.
Thank you for having me. A real pleasure. Thanks.